Thank you for your time. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we are doing here at Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find that we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information, in the hopes that you will find it fun, interesting, and entertaining. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and come to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. I'm your host, Betula. Slim, what's going on, buddy?
Good, I'm good.
You're good?
What's going on? Not much, just crack-a-lacking.
Excellent. So on today's episode, we're going to touch on a subject that I always found really super interesting, and mostly because of how obvious it is. And what I'm talking about is the moon, right? It's the most notable object in the nighttime sky. It's something that we completely take for granted, and it seemed to me that that it would be something that would be worthy of exploring and pointing out some insights with regards to it, that how unusual it actually is. All right. Now, having said all of that, is there anything you'd like to say before I jump in?
No, I'm good.
All right. Okay. So, all right. So let's start with the moon in and of itself, right? So it's often referred to as Luna, right? Or they'll use other adjectives like lunar in terms of description of it. It's Earth's only natural satellite, and it goes around the Earth a distance of 239,000 miles. That's 385,000 kilometers. The Earth and Moon are tidally locked, and their rotations are so in sync we only see one side of the Moon, right? So and it's a 1-for-1 ratio in terms of the rotation. So every time we see the Moon, it rotates so that we see the same side every time we rotate. So that's why you hear them refer to the moon as having a near side and a far side, or a dark side, and which is kind of erroneous because it rotates completely all the time, but we just never see the other side because in our rotation it puts us on the opposite side in our rotation puts us on the opposite side of the planet versus where the moon's sitting, right? Does it make sense?
Relative perspective gets really weird when you think about like space, and it's like this is spinning at a certain speed that way in this orbit. And that's the thing, it's not just a circular orbit. It's like a spring because it goes through time and space.
Right, but it does that in conjunction with all the bodies in the solar system, and since the Earth is just simply one of the bodies in the solar system, again, like we're all kind of locked into the mechanics of how the solar system tumbles through space, right? And that includes the sun itself, right? None of this stuff is stationary. And remember, the illusion is that you think you're standing still when it couldn't be further from the truth, right? So now, having said that. So the mass of the moon is 1.2% of Earth's, right? So it makes it like considering that it's a quarter of the size of the Earth. So its diameter is roughly about 3,474 kilometers, or 2,159 miles. So it's about, basically 4 of them would fit into the same volume of space, right? That approximately that the Earth holds. So, and that's a bit of an unusual feature, right? And I'll explain why. So when you look at the moons of Mars, both are smaller. The larger of the two is known as Phobos, and it's only 14 miles across. It's 22 kilometers. And then there's Deimos, which is only 8 miles across, and it's 13 kilometers. And then you look at Jupiter's moons, and Jupiter has about 60 small natural satellites. But because of the nature of it being such an enormous gas giant, it probably has pulled a lot of these moons into its orbit because its gravity captured them, right? So throughout its lifespan. All right, so and the only other moon that's kind of sizable and comparable is Titan. It's a moon of Saturn, but it orbits far off. Let me try that again. It orbits further away from Saturn than, say, our moon to the Earth, because our moon actually orbits very closely to the Earth, right? Which is, again, one of those things that's highly unusual about it. So in terms of the orbit, the moon has a 1-to-1 ratio spin. So it makes the moon's orbital periods around the Earth equal to the corresponding rotation periods of the Earth itself, right? So that's why we always only ever see one side of the moon. It's not that it's not spinning, but it spins to match us in such a way that once it does a complete rotation, our complete rotation allows for us to see the same spot. So again, it used to confuse me endlessly when I used to try to understand why it is that there was such a thing as a dark side of the moon, and how it rotated to match, if it rotated at that time, right? So anyway. So getting on with the rotation itself, it's tidally locked. So what that means is it's in synchronous rotation with us, so again, we again pointed out that there's this misnomer that there's a dark side. It's only dark because it's a side we never see because of the nature of the rotation. And then there's the near side, which is the one that we always see, right? So again, misnomers, right?
I have to ask about the tidal lock. Does that relate to it locking our tides and like the timing of it?
Well,
or
here
is it like the interrelation of
it's the relationship between the moon and the Earth itself, and then that includes all the bodies of water, right? So since the Earth is largely covered in water, it actually exerts an influence on the water. It pushes and pulls the water. All right. So and why is it's the thing that most of us don't even casually. You don't need to understand the specifics of it, other than that because of the way it's tidally locked and we're in the synchronous orbit with each other in rotation, what it provides for the Earth is a more livable environment. It stabilizes our climate. It minimizes the wobble on the axis, so that it's not. It would be a lot greater if it wasn't there. It causes the tides, but it also allows for consistent seasons. So you know how we have 4 dominant seasons. Spring, summer, fall, and winter. It's what allows for the seasons that we experience, and it minimizes extreme weather patterns, right? Because of its influence. Therefore, life thrives on the planet Earth largely because of the moon, right? So Luna does us a huge freaking favor. Okay, so in terms of like the moon itself, there's lots of ideas about what's the origin of the moon, and there's no agreement on how it was formed, right? So but there are a number of theories, and the first one is the capture theory, which is a theory that the moon was floating by and was pulled into Earth orbit, and the reality is most scientists consider that a virtual impossibility, right? Particularly because of its size. So then there's the accretion theory. The moon and the Earth formed from the same dust cloud, and could, in the earliest development of the solar system. However, formed from the same materials would mean similar traits. Following the reasoning, the moon would have developed like the Earth. An iron core, would spin on its axis, it would mimic Earth, except it doesn't. So it brings the accretion theory into question. Then there's the fission theory. It states that the moon was made from material from the Earth. As a result of the Earth spinning so fast, a portion of it was ejected and formed the moon. And However, moon rock is much older than the material found on the Earth. So again, unlikely because of the difference in age in terms of rocks from the Earth to the moon. And then there's the giant impact theory, that the earliest version of the Earth was impacted by a large celestial object, and the debris field that formed as a result of the impact created the Earth and the moon. And again, because of differential in the age of the materials of both the Earth and the moon, it seems unlikely. And it's not me that says this, it's commonly cited by those who study it. So these are just the ideas, right? And the most recent thinking is that a large object collided with the earliest version of the Earth around 4 billion years ago, vaporizing the Earth and the object, and the vaporized cloud forming the Earth and the moon. Again, unlikely because the difference in the age of the materials that make up both the Earth and the moon, right?
How did they age the material coming from the moon?
Well, they've accumulated about, and it's not just the American lunar landings, but the Soviets landed on unmanned lander that collected rocks. So you can imagine that virtually anybody who's gone there. So there's about 900 pounds worth of moon rocks on the Earth that were brought back and have been under constant study since the late 60s. Right, so then again, they can determine the age of the stone in terms of like when it was formed versus like, so they can get an approximate age.
Well, I'm just curious because I know carbon dating doesn't work with
Yeah,
rock.
but they're not measuring the carbon.
Do you think it's like
it's the composition of the rock, right? So then
Okay.
they can and then they do a comparative study against composition of other rocks, and so that'll give them a timetable of like how far back that particular composition came into being versus a different composition of stone. So that's my understanding. And again, it's super limited, and I don't pretend to understand it other than to say that it's cited by these very experts who do study this stuff. So again, we just, it's deferring to their expertise, right? So and that's what they determine. However, acquired samples of moon rocks from manned presence on the moon since 1969 and unmanned surveyors, because the Russians sent a surveyor to the moon for the purpose of collecting rocks and then returning them, right, so that they could study them, right? So the moon rocks, and so they've accumulated moon rocks and soil samples. The soil and rocks on the moon surface are older than the soil and rocks underneath them. This is seen all over the moon. It doesn't matter where they take the samples from. The surface rocks are older than when they do like a core sample, than the sample they get when they do a core. Now, how deep they do the core digs, like again, I couldn't say, but I always found that super interesting. The fact that like. And it's suggestive of something which we won't get into just yet until we get these details out of the way. So, and like I said, and this seems to be true all over the moon. No matter where they do take the samples from, it's the same. Okay, so it's highly unusual because typically you would expect it to be the reverse. That the newer material be at the surface, and the deeper you go, like in terms of digging or taking a core sample, that the material be older at the core, right? So the only explanation and again, it's some researchers have offered, others just simply won't comment on it. The older materials on the surface are because of mining. So that means the material was brought from the core to the surface and just dumped onto the surface. Right, and that would that kind of mining digging would allow for that, would bring those older materials to the surface. So essentially, it's a hollowing out of the moon that would produce this effect. And again, it's to say that it's controversial goes without saying, right? But as far as explanations go, it seems like. I don't want to say the most viable explanation, but it's a reasonable explanation. Now, whether or not it's actually the case,
Yeah, I was thinking it would be interesting because I know if there was like asteroid impact on the surface, there would be spots of like older dirt on top of the newer stuff, but that would be patches. If it was drilling like throughout the whole surface area, then it's reasonable to say like, oh, all that shit
All right.
came up
Okay, it's
and was
interesting that
like
you bring that up,
deposited.
and that actually falls under the heading of moon anomalies, which I have a list of 10
Oh,
anomalies that you're gonna find unusual. Go ahead.
can I have one? Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, the moon is super bright. What the hell's up with that?
Oh, wait. Well, it's because it's because its surface is reflective. It's kind of like pasty white, right?
Yeah.
So anytime you have that, any light isn't white things don't absorb light; they reflect it, right? That's why the brightest regions on the planet are the poles, right? And that's because the accumulation of snow and it's all white, right? So and again that explains why the moon's as bright as it is, but it's not part of the 10 anomalies. But I will read each anomaly, and then if you have a comment, you can comment on it, and we'll offer up something.
Let me just add this.
Sure.
During the middle of winter, if you have snow where you're from, like, not you specifically, the watcher. I know, my bad. No, but like you think about snow blindness, like when you see super bright snow and your eyes aren't quite adjusted,
Yeah,
it hurts.
Yeah, because it again, you're catching the reflection of the sunlight.
Yeah.
So
How bright would that, or how reflective would that moon surface have to be to reflect,
oh,
like, as well as it does? Like,
well,
it seems
it's
crazy.
interesting that you pointed out, and then again, it'll dovetail into um, those who believe that the entire moon landings were a hoax. It's part of their commentary on in terms of like why you can't see the stars and the photos. Just wait, we'll get there. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but let's just start with the moon anomalies. So one. Typically, denser materials are found on the way to the core of any planetary object, and lighter materials towards the surface. On the moon, denser material is at the surface, and no one's been able to offer up any kind of like definitive explanation, right? So, and again, we just covered that, and we were talking about how that it might be as a result of like mining and digging to hollowing out the moon, and then the question it brings up an even weirder question: that why would you do that? And then who would do that, right? So, and again, I'll save the speculation because we're going to do enough wild speculation, but not just yet. Let's just get through this. Anything you'd like to say with regards to the material, the actual composition and material of the moon itself?
Oh, no, I was just curious about where it was going to lead with, like, you think about the density and the size of the moon, like how it suggests, like, it says that it's not very dense, and you're saying the crust is the
Right. It's
densest
only
part of it.
and remember, it's only 1.2% of Earth's mass. So that means like even though it's a quarter of our size, it's a fraction of the mass of the planet.
I was curious because, like, there's so much hype over, like, finding water on the moon.
Oh wait, we'll get to that.
I just don't see water being there. Like,
Well,
especially with the recent.
it might not even be naturally occurring water. It could be water that's just been accumulated, uh, like from the void of space itself.
Yeah.
Right. So again, and in the form of ice and that sort of thing and stuff, and then. So anyway, again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, it's all good. So two, the surface of the moon is covered in asteroid impacts, and you had just mentioned that. So this is you're going to find terribly fascinating. The impact fields are covered in rocks. These rocks should be a variety of different ages, except they share a uniformity in age, right? So the crater depths also seem uniform. No matter the width of the crater, it's counterintuitive. So anytime there's an impact crater, they're all approximately to the same depth. They don't penetrate any deeper than a particular depth. And this is, nobody questions this, but nobody understands why this occurs, right? So again, we'll just move. So it's something just to think about. And again, when we get further through the note package, will sort of offer up an explanation. All right. So okay. So number 3, lunar dust is different chemically than lunar soil and rock. So that means then that the dust that's accumulated on the surface, that's not part of the natural soil and rocks, has come from elsewhere. So I would speculate that it's picked up as we've moved through space, that particles exist in space, and there's zero atmosphere. Or at least the argument is there's no atmosphere on the moon. So then, anytime we'd move through any kind of particulate that might be in the path of the orbit of the solar system, that it would accumulate these things, right? So that might be an explanation for the fact that the lunar dust is far older than the actual soil and rock itself. Okay, so here's another thing that's highly unusual about the moon. Number 4, the moon has no magnetic field, yet moon rocks are magnetized. Again, no explanations offered up because it's counterintuitive. It would only occur if there was a magnetic field on the moon, but it doesn't. It doesn't have a magnetic field, right?
I'm kind of curious if there's any way like solar flares over time could have done that. Would have been a uniform chaotic pattern.
Your guess is as good as mine, and again, it might actually speak to what it is, but again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Don't worry, we'll get there eventually. Okay, so number 5, moon rocks have been dated back to the formation of the solar system. Earth is estimated to be about 4.54 billion years old, plus or minus about 50 million years. Scientists are searching for the oldest rocks to radiometrically date. And so they found in northwestern Canada, they discovered rocks that are about 4.03 billion years old. And somehow the rocks on the moon are older than that, right? So again, it's the kind of thing you go, super unusual. Don't understand why this is the case. Number 6, radioactive element isotopes like uranium-236, neptunium-237 don't occur naturally, yet they're present on the moon, and they're not natural to the Earth. They exist because we make them, but yet here they are. They're present on the moon. So, and these are man-made isotopes, right? So again, super unusual, right? So number 7, because there's something you want to say.
Oh no, I was just sort of. I was thinking about like I could see iron being a common element. I could see like a bunch of different things being common elements because you see that in like star formations,
right?
Like even in extreme cases, you'll get like denser material, but seeing isotopes that are like that far down on the periodic table, it's like that would be like so much fusion. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It defies explanation. So then, if you follow the natural conclusion, if it can only be manufactured, then what's it doing on the moon? That means some form of manufacturing had to occur, right? So again, another super bizarre question.
What if they nuked the moon and just told nobody? They're like, we gotta test these things
but
somewhere.
wouldn't you see it? Wouldn't we have some level of awareness of it? I don't know. Number 7 in moon anomalies, right? This one you're gonna love. Rare metals like titanium, chromium, zirconium are some of the strongest metals known, and they're corrosion resistant, and they exist in abundance on the moon. Right, so the strongest metals we have in the rare metals, they exist in abundance on the moon. So you can see where there might be an appeal to going to the moon for mining, like just for these metals. But here's the real question: why is this stuff on the moon?
I heard they found sulfur on the moon.
No, wait, we'll get there too. It's okay.
Okay, that's the thing. I was just checking out one video about this thing just because it was interesting, like what India did and sent
Their rover.
Yeah, I was interested in that, so I checked out the first Chandrayaan 1, 2, and 3. Just a video on those, and all of a sudden you're bringing up all these things that are related to that, and it seems coincidental.
It's not coincidental.
Yeah, like, no, that's the thing. I didn't study this material with you. I never do.
No, I bring in the note package. It's all unscripted. So what we do here on Shooting from the Hip, I create a note package. I choose a subject, and Slim and I basically hammer it out. And Slim doesn't come into the conversation prepared typically for the conversation. Although today he is. So again, there's lots of overlap in the stuff that he was looking at before. Because it's not because I withhold stuff. I tell him what we're doing. It's just that he doesn't look into it beyond like anything more than maybe in the more superficial kind of way. Although this time I think I get the impression I guess you took a more deeper dive, right?
It's not inappropriate to say I'm a pothead YouTuber. It's like my favorite thing to do. But yeah, I was checking out different things that they found using a alpha particle X-ray spectrometer and laser-induced breakdown spectrometer. They're looking for a variety of things, but there's aluminum, there's a variety of iron. This is iron 2 mostly at different wavelengths.
It speaks to like how unusual the moon is, and as we go through the note package, my note package, you're going to discover it's more and more unusual.
One thing I want to bring up is the outer shell of, like, it's just bleach white. It could be calcium because they found that on the surface, but at the same time, like, how do you get that much calcium surrounding an entire planet? Like,
not
planet, whatever.
Well, but there's some people who've referred to the Earth-Moon relationship as that they're double planets, right? Because of, and that's largely has a lot to do with the size of the moon, right? So, okay, but again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So, number 8 in moon anomalies. The Earth's moons is the largest moon in the solar system. And this is unusual because it's not seen anywhere in our solar system, but in any other attempts for us to look at other planets, their moons, I think the largest was 50 miles across. And when we're talking about Phobos and Deimos for Mars, they were a fraction of that size. So again, another unusual feature to the moon. Like it as far as people who study it are concerned, it shouldn't be as large as it is, right? And then to have such a reduced mass with the same kind of size, right? So again, super unusual. Moon anomaly number 9. The orbit is considered to the Earth is considered almost too close to the Earth, and it's almost a perfect circular orbit, right? Which again, highly unusual. The orbit allows for, and then because of this, the orbit allows for a near perfect solar eclipse. So again, like, it's not seen elsewhere. So another super unusual feature. Number 10 of the moon anomalies. The Earth's distance from the sun is 400 times our distance to the moon. And the sun is 400 times the size of the moon. So you go like, the statistical odds of that occurring, so because that's what allows for the solar eclipse, like the distances between them, their size in relationship to these distances allow for that to happen. And you go like, it doesn't occur anywhere else. So they go like, again, random chance doesn't allow for that as far as they're concerned.
Is it common to have that orbital, like, at a 1-to-1 ratio where it's always facing us, we're always facing the moon?
No, like I said, again, but that's because it's tidally locked. So we don't, and because of its size, so we don't know that other moons are exerting the same kind of influence on the planets that they orbit in the same way that Luna has an effect on the Earth, right? So what makes this all the more interesting, all these anomalies notwithstanding and everything we talked about, like, that the older material on the surface and younger material as you move towards the core of the planet. Here's a wild speculation, and it was formed in 1970 between two scientists from the Soviet Union, and their conclusion, based on all this evidence and coincidences, their view was not only is it hollow, that it's a spaceship. And both agreed this sounded crazy, but it seemed like the only reasonable explanation, right? And so, and again, they weren't willing to hang themselves on it, but they're going like when you start looking at all these anomalies and all these unusual characteristics, and that you do it from a broad perspective, it says something. So then why would you have a hollow planet or a celestial object like that? Unless it was unless you were using the natural materials found in space to create spaceships, right? So and then again, it speaks to the idea of how unusual the moon is. And there's some, and we're going to just briefly touch on that now, is there are some historical traditions that kind of reflect the idea of that there was a time when there was no moon in the sky, and that the moon was the presence of the moon was a direct result of mythological beings and stuff. So you can read into that as much as you want, and again, it becomes a deeper, wilder speculation. But in the earliest traditions, they talked about a sky without a moon. Roman and Greek accounts from the 5th century before the Common Era spoke about a moonless sky, like the Arcadians talked about it, and it was there long before the Greeks and the Romans came into existence. Ancient cultures of Bolivia and Tiwanaku have accounts of a time without a moon, and according to this is South America, so think of like Inca and Mayans, and their estimations was that before 11,500 to say maybe 13,500 years ago, there was no moon in the sky. And that what's interesting about that is it coincides with the Younger Dryas. All right. So in Africa, there's Zulu traditions that say the moon is hollow, inhabited by alien reptilians. Right?
Okay, that's way too specific.
but that's the tradition, right?
Yeah.
And their story states that two gods, brothers, put the moon in orbit and claimed before the moon, the climate was different. No seasons, permanent cloud of water vapor that permeated the atmosphere, and it covered the earth. And after the arrival of the moon, all the water vapor condensed and fell to the earth. A massive flood was the result. Right?
Wouldn't this be
and the climate was stabilized. What's that?
Wouldn't this be considered in most traditions to be like pre-Sumerian?
Well, again, if you're talking about there. In the case of Bolivia and Tiwanaku, they're talking about excess of 13,000 years ago. So Sumer, as far as we understand, is dated to about 6,000 years ago. So you can read into that all you want, but we know that absolutely the moon has stabilized the climate and the atmosphere of the planet, right? And then the Zulu, as specific as who they attributed the existence of the moon to, they also specifically talked about what the natural environment and atmosphere of the planet was like before the moon was present. Go on.
That seems interesting, because the way I see this, hypothetically, if the moon was a spaceship with any sort of,
well, again, you can read into it as much as you want,
yeah.
but
if we take it strictly for what they're saying, it seems like they're saying it's a vehicle already. So assuming it's a vehicle and it's orbiting perfectly, and
what if it's not a spaceship? What if it's like an orbital station?
Right.
Death Star.
Oh, I hope it's not a Death Star.
No. But it could be like in Star
happy star.
A happy star.
But it's not a star.
No, so it could be this observation kind of.
That's what it's leading to.
Right, or a place where an orbital staging ground.
I was gonna say something along the lines of was it terrain forming, geoforming?
Terraforming?
Terraforming, that's it.
Well, but I thought terraforming usually meant that what they did was they tried to create a livable atmosphere and then converted the surface terrain to be able to sustain very particular types of life. Like that was the impression I was always under, either terraforming. And in this case, they're not. What they did was they basically hollowed out a planetoid, and then for the purposes of creating maybe potentially a base or staging ground for them to do, well, whatever that is that they were going to do. And again, this is all wild speculation. I don't expect anyone to believe it, but it makes the conversation far more interesting. And then when you look at the moon, and you look at all these anomalies, and it's not the end of the anomalies, we're not there yet, but when it gets even more unusual, right? So again, having said that, in terms of like the last traditions, you brought the Sumerians up. They spoke of two brothers, Enki and Enlil, who were the Anunnaki, and they were supposed to be extraterrestrial gods and the creators of man. And the universal flood is part of their mythology and their systems of legends and stories. And in their oldest writing, Sumerian flood myth is from 2150 BCE. That's before the Common Era. So that means 2,000 years before year zero, right? Okay, so the 4,000 years ago, right? So again, super interesting. It's even more interesting that what they do is they cite that these creator gods also were the ones who brought the moon, brought the moon to the planet, right?
Well, that's what I wanted to bring up earlier. I didn't know the Sumerians had a tradition or had a mythology around this.
Okay. Well,
but I mean,
now you do.
It makes sense. It would make sense because I knew about this whole story about the Anunnaki, but I didn't know specifically how it relates to the Sumerians. But knowing that they had kings with unusually long time or lifespans that we consider like, not real science. It's just mythology. It seems like if there was this whole species of reptilians, like the Zulus say, that would be.
It's
coincidental,
right? But and it's all wild speculation. But it fits all how unusual all the moon is, right? So and you can dispel this. And again, remember, a lot of the material reductionist scientists simply dispel all of this, and they'll argue that just because we don't know doesn't mean that it wasn't a result of natural processes. But again, because there's so many unusual anomalies, that it does give you cause to pause and think, go, wait a minute, because this is a reflection on the human story too. So that it's suggestive then that our story is really super incomplete, and there's a huge significant portion that we're oblivious to, and it might actually have something to do with the moon to a degree, greater or lesser degree. But again, that's all speculation. You can't definitively say absolutely without question. It's just that now when you cross-reference all this different stuff, you go, it's suggestive. That's it. Yeah.
I think just being self-aware is so insane of a goal, because reality being here is like, I don't know what the chances were, but
infinitesimally.
Thank you. I gotta have a person I can just point to and they
sure.
say the word without messing up. But yeah, no, the chance of that is so small, and then you think, oh, the chance of being born here at this age, at this time, as who I am. Whatever grabs your interest, I feel like that's in some way a goal. Like, even if this is, sci-fi fantasy and you are reductionist,
it could very well be. But then again, what if it's not?
Right.
What if it's this twisted reality? And because the way that science, the material reductionist scientists often paint reality, it's pretty mundane. Although they'll go like it's fantastic, even in its ordinary, how ordinary it is. I'm like, but it's suggestive that it's even more fantastic than we've ever been allowed to even imagine. So then again, you go, is the human story just a piece of science fiction
Well, that's the thing.
that we're completely oblivious to?
Being oblivious to it is probably better than being terrified by it. Like, if you're a reductionist, you got a good buffer, like, going around in your brain. But at the same time, you think about this shit just as data points, it's pretty funky. You could write a good sci-fi out of it.
100%. So for any of you aspiring sci-fi authors, and if you're using any of this stuff, please, I would love to read your book. Okay, so again, now moving on to more unusual phenomenon and things that, again, make the moon all the more unusual. Have you ever heard of transient lunar phenomenon or lunar transient phenomenon? It's referred to that way. Okay, so TLP, or transient lunar phenomena, is rather, it's short-lived changes in light, color, or appearance of the surface of the moon. Now you go like, how would we even know? Well, these short-lived lunar phenomena go back at least 1,000 years and are observed independently and by multiple witnesses who are and reputable scientists. So it's people with telescopes and stuff checking out the moon. They see this stuff, but it's not just amateurs, it's the professionals as well, right? So the majority of the phenomenon reports are irreproducible. You can't, because there's no way, so it's all anecdotal, right? And there's no adequate control experiments that could explain the origins and why something like this occurs. And yet we know, at least through personal and professional observations and anecdotal accounts, that this stuff occurs, and it's been occurring for at least the last 1,000 years that people have been looking at the moon, right? So most lunar scientists acknowledge this transient event as outgassing, some kind of impact cratering and stuff. So that this is, again, not a subject that's free of controversy, but what makes it so unusual is you get, like I said, light, color, or appearance changes at the surface, and people are observing them, and it's amateurs and professionals alike.
I'm dying. I feel like there's suspense here. What kind of, like, is it a flash? Is it just like a flex of
There's
light?
flashes of light. There's color changes on the surface. There are some who've said that they've observed like not clouds and water vapor and stuff like that. So I would go so far as to say it's dependent on the individual and the kind of powerful telescopes. And we know that amateurs now can get their hands on some pretty powerful telescopes. And then it's not just them. Now you get professional academics. Now the way they try to sort of offer up an explanation is that some form of outgassing or some kind of impact cratering, like that, objects crashing in, and it creates this flash. Except the problem is that these flashing of lights, sometimes there's patterns to them, sometimes they're inconsistent and irregular, sometimes they're very regular. The color changes, or entire regions on the surface of the moon change color. And again, nobody can exactly explain why this occurs, but yet it does occur. Not only does it occur, it's not a recent phenomenon. For the last 1,000 years that we've been looking at the moon, people have been seeing this shit. So
this is surprising to me, because I know it's reflective, but I don't think the moon refracts light where it bends it. Like, it has to be a little translucent for that to happen.
Well, there's no real atmosphere on the moon, so so you're not going to get any kind of distortion of light and stuff like that. So
that kind of rules out a lot of things that you would say, like, oh, if there's a meteor impact, maybe the area was lit up because of the shape of
the release of all that energy from the impact.
Yeah, it seems kind of.
Again, yeah, but There's no adequate, nobody's ever adequately explained the fact that this phenomena exists, and yet we keep seeing it.
I feel like there would have to be a lot of coincidental things to line up to make that make sense scientifically.
I couldn't, it's way outside my area of expertise. So like in terms of commentary and stuff, I can't tell you why this shit's occurring. I can only tell you that it is occurring. And then then what it tells me is that there's some aspect to the moon that we're completely oblivious to. We have no idea why these things occur, other than to say that they are occurring, and we have no real means of like measurement, or at least nobody's found it worthy of study to apply some kind of means of measurement, right? So, all right. So now I just want to. Again, speaking to these unusual phenomena on the moon, I'd like to comment on Apollo 10. So Apollo 10 was the Apollo missions. Their effort to make sure that they could actually get to the moon and return from the moon safely, right? So it was before anyone landed on the moon. It was their first efforts, and so it's kind of benign in and of itself. They're just basically like taking a road trip to the moon and back, right? Like, which is kind of a fantastic road trip. Like, if I'm, being honestly speaking up front, but there's something unusual about Apollo 10. So there was this. There are weird audio recordings documented where weird music was heard by the Apollo astronauts on the far side of the moon. So, because they did orbit the moon before they returned, and alone on the far side of the moon, they were out of radio contact with NASA, and the astronauts reported hearing like whistling sounds, which one said sounds like outer space music. So we know that this occurred, and because they have audio recordings of it. But the explanation NASA offered is that was feedback from all the different types of radio communication equipment that was on board the module itself. Right? That's the explanation that they offer.
I can understand that, or like ambient radiation pickup.
All right, but they described it as being music.
That's creepy.
Right? Like, so they didn't say sounds.
Yeah.
They heard, like, one of them described as being like a whistling sound, but others were reported as saying like that it sounds like outer space music. Well, what does outer space music sound like?
I'm guessing a lot of pheromones, whatever. And yeah, no, that's weird, because to have something sounding like music, it has to have notes where you're pausing.
Right.
Like, it's not just constant communication.
Right. So then again, it's super unusual. Is there a banal kind of explanation for it? Like, maybe. But then again, what if it's exactly what was described? Right. So then that's suggestive. Like, was it an attempt at communication, or they pick up radio transmissions from some kind of alien internet?
I'm gonna go full Alex Jones. I'm telling you, man, it's the whales. The whales are talking.
Are they? Okay, and again, I'm gonna cite a couple more Apollo missions that are kind of significant, and they're significant in terms of what they demonstrate about the moon. Again, other more anomalies, right, that speak to the moon perhaps being hollow or having vast hollowed out caverns. So Apollo 12, after returning to the command module, intentionally crashed the lunar lander into the moon's surface. The seismic sensors that they left on the moon showed it rang. The reverberations rang like a bell for longer than an hour. Remarkably small object could produce such effect. Again, left them kind of dumbfounded. They're like, they couldn't explain how and why. And then with Apollo 13, they decided to crash an even heavier object into the surface. And in doing that, it rang for 3 hours and measured reverberations to a depth of 20 miles. The speed of the reverberations increased to 40 miles the further it went in depth. This doesn't occur on the Earth if you do something like that because of its density, suggesting that the density of the moon is not only far less, but perhaps even hollow. So the moon is 25% the size of the Earth with only 1% of the Earth's density. So again, it speaks to how super unusual the moon is in and of itself. And again, supportive of all those other anomalies that speak to the idea that it could be hollow, right?
Yeah, I was thinking of natural ways that could have happened, but that none of it would make sense. Like
No.
the closest thing I could come to is like, oh, what if there's a bunch of calcium on some muddy planet? You know, it has that just muddy layer on the outside,
Sure.
water on the inside, because
Yeah, but no.
and then it dries out.
Yeah,
But no, still that wouldn't make sense because asteroid impacts would like tear through the crust.
Right, and we know, and one of the unusual anomalies is that the craters from asteroids only penetrate to a certain depth.
Which is also unusual, considering how not dense it is.
It's all unusual. So then, does that mean that underneath all the rocks and soil, is there a dense metal shell?
One thing I wanted to add, when I was doing my own research, I was looking into this sample they took. They only went 8 centimeters down, which I found kind of weird. But the interesting thing was, it was 60 degrees Celsius on the surface, and then underneath the surface, it was negative 10 degrees Celsius. Only 8 centimeters. That's about 3 inches for.
Okay, but that again, super unusual. Like, but you know
like
what?
It's porous enough. It should have like more or less equal.
Well, I don't know.
Heat,
When you walk on the beach in the summertime, the surface is super hot. As soon as you bury your feet underneath the sand, it's cool, right? So to me, it doesn't seem that unusual. But the idea that like crater depths only get to a certain depth, and nobody again, it's not disputed. It's just not. They just don't understand why. So what if there was a continuous metal shell, and that as a result of thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years, it accumulated all the material on the surface? Or that what they did was they hollowed out the interior and then lined the interior in metal. Right? So again, super weird, and you go, I don't know if there's any truth to that, but it's not an unreasonable explanation. But yet again, we're talking about something that completely defies reason. It's outside of what the experts expect from any kind of moon for any planetary object. Now, having said all that interesting stuff about the moon, and since we brought up the Apollo missions, I would just like to comment very quickly on Apollo 11. Okay, so Apollo 11 was from July 16th to the 24th in 1969, an American space flight that first landed humans on the moon. Commander Neil Armstrong and lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin landed the Apollo lunar module Eagle 1 on July 20th, 1969. Armstrong became the first person to step on the moon's surface. 6 hours and 39 minutes later, on July 21st, they spent 2 hours and 15 minutes, that Buzz Aldrin, 2 hours after, stepped out onto the surface. They spent 2 hours and 15 minutes exploring the site and named it Tranquility Base, right, upon landing. They collected 47.5 pounds or 21.5 kilograms of lunar material to return to Earth, and were on the moon's surface for a total of 21 hours and 36 minutes before rejoining Columbia, who was piloted by Michael Collins, who flew the command module Columbia in lunar orbit, and were on the moon's surface, like I said, for a total of 21 hours 36 minutes before lifting off and joining Columbia. Now, I don't know if you've ever, I've seen some YouTube videos where they showed the crew from Apollo 11 after they returned to the Earth, and these individuals seemed almost disheartened, right? And never spoke openly about what they saw and experienced there beyond, like in the most superficial way. So that leaves room for tons of speculation, which we're not going to jump into. But what I do want to do is I want to comment on why any of this occurred, and the fact that they treated the moon landings. There's some who treat the moon landings as a complete hoax. Now, so I want to start talking about that time period, 1969, or the decade before, leading up to the Apollo 11 landing on the moon. So the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic were in a Cold War, right? So they fought it through proxy countries. And part of that was in a propaganda war, like trying to assert one's better than the other. So to get an idea of like what led to all of that, and then we're going to jump into why people think it was hoax. Okay, so it was important to win the propaganda war against the Soviet Union because of all the firsts in terms of space flight and space exploration that the Soviets had accomplished leading up to the American moon landing, right? So in 1957, the Soviet space program had the first intercontinental ballistic missile and orbital vehicle launch, R-7 Semyorka, right? And the first satellite, Sputnik 1. First animal in Earth orbit, the dog Laika, Sputnik 2. In 1959, the first rocket ignition Earth orbit, first man-made object to escape Earth's gravity, right? Also in 59, the first data communications telemetry to come from outer space, right? Also in 59, the first man-made object to pass near the moon, first man-made object in heliocentric orbit. Also the first probe to impact the moon, Luna 2. First images of the moon's far side, Luna 3. 1960, first animals safely returned from Earth orbits, dogs Belka and Strelka, Sputnik 5. In 61, the first probe launched to Venus, Venera 1. In 61, another first is a first person in space, and the international as according to the international definition of space, and Earth orbit, Yuri Gagarin, Vostok 1. Another first in 61 was first person to spend over 24 hours in space, Gurman Titov, Vostok 2, first person to sleep, and he was also the first person to sleep in space. In 1962, the first dual crewed spaceflight, Vostok 3 and 4. Also in 62 was the first probe launch to Mars, Mars 1. In 1963, the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, Vostok 6. In 1964, the first multi-person crew, there was 3 of them, Volskhood 1. In 1965, first extravehicular activity, EVA, Alexei Leonov, Voskhod 2. In 65, the first radio telescope space, Zone 3. And another first in 65 was the first probe to hit another planet of the solar system, Venus, Venera 3. In 66, first probe to make a soft landing and to transmit from the surface of the moon, Luna 9. Also in 66, the first probe in lunar orbit, Luna 10. Another, in 1966, the first image of the whole Earth disk, Moloniya 1. In 67, the first uncrewed rendezvous and docking, Cosmos 186 and Cosmos 188. In 1968, first living beings to reach the moon, circumlunar flights and return unharmed to Earth. Russian tortoise and other life forms on Zond 5. In 1969, first docking between two crewed craft in Earth orbit in exchange for crews Soyuz 4 and Soyuz 5. Okay, so you can see that the climate of the time, and in the face of that propaganda war, they were losing at least that propaganda war, right? And so the response was in the 50s was President Dwight Eisenhower in 1958 created the National Aeronautic and Space Act, creating the agency NASA. Right, so we know that to be true. And then it wasn't until JFK was became president, and he made the public speech to mobilize nation. We choose to go to the moon. At Rice, it was a Rice University speech on September 12, 1962, and sets the stage for NASA's Apollo missions. Apollo 11, eventually winning the space race to the moon, right? And it was the trump card. It didn't matter what the Soviets had done leading up to it. They were the first humans on the moon, and they were Americans versus Soviets, right? So again, this idea that all of this was driven by a propaganda war against their competitors, right? And which and again they won. And remember, billions of people tuned in to see, because it was televised, the landing on the moon, right? Like so it's just, it's kind of, you think of the time period in 1969, it's kind of astounding.
Yeah, because like it's definitely a huge milestone for civilization. Because like the other guys, oh yeah, they slept in space. They have a dog in space. We landed on the moon. We number one. Like,
right.
It's boasting rights, really.
Well, but again, it speaks to the whole point, right? Like that was at that time, because it was a Cold War. Part of the way it was fought was through propaganda, right?
Yeah, this is like a real galvanizing story.
Right, 100%. And it's a critical step for humanity. Because as far as we're aware, they're the first humans to ever leave the planet successfully and step onto another world. Right? So kind of crazy, kind of cool. So, all right. So now let's get to the entire. I don't even know how to describe it, because it's this weird thing that's grown up since that time. It's grown into the culture. It's this idea that the moon landings were hoaxed, and they were hoaxed so they could have that trump card. My personal feeling is they absolutely went to the moon, and I think that those who buy into the hoax, I think they're misguided. I don't, does NASA withhold shit, and have they, they've lost, they claim that they've misplaced like tapes and footage and stuff like that. So I'm like, is it questionable? Yes, 100%. But in terms of like whether or not they actually went, my personal feeling is they absolutely went to the moon, right? But to give a little kind of insight into that, according to a 2013 poll, 7 million Americans think the entire thing never happened. And currently, 22% of Americans either have doubts or don't believe it happened, right? In 2016, a British poll found that more than half, 52% of Brits, think that the Apollo 11 moon landing was faked. An astonishing 73% of Brits aged 25 to 34 believe the entire thing was a hoax, right?
Imagine asking them, so you believe they faked it? Yeah, I believe they faked it. Which one? Well, I don't know the name.
Well, Apollo 11 is the one that they cite here, the landing.
I'm just saying they...
Oh, right. So, and very often, those who, remember, they believe, they have faith in the hoax, and what they do is they attribute it to they offer up these things. Well, there's no stars in the photos. Well, to give you some perspective, I'm not an expert in photography, but photographing the stars on even on the moon requires a long shutter exposure to be able to get the adequate amount of light. The problem is it's so bright, there's so much sunlight, and the moon surface is so reflective, you would overexpose the film. So the pictures that they cite that don't have any kind of stars in them, if you apply like some of those like image filters and stuff, and you can actually bring out the stars. They're faint, but they're there. And so it's not because of the atmosphere and the scattering light effect, it's because of how much direct light there is that it basically blots them out. So that kind of explains it away. And I'm sure that like for anyone who believes it would just think that that's a convenient way to explain it away, right?
I've heard some people say, "Oh, there's no way to actually bring the film back because it would get exposed to like excessive amounts of radiation." It's like, no, you put it in a box. That way, as soon as
a
you
metal box or a lead-lined
Yeah,
box, and guess what? It's preserved from any form of radiation.
yeah, as soon as you take the photo, you put it in there, then it's stable until you bring it back to Earth, and then you're in a dark room. You deal with all that.
Right, right. They often cite as well shadows in the photographs that going in the wrong directions. And so even taking photographs here, it all depends on where you're taking the photograph from, where the light source is, and then the lenses always distort the image to a degree. So again, I'm sure the believers would be like, that's a convenient explanation, but it's also something that we understand to be true, like because it happens here on Earth if you're trying to take photographs, right? They often cite the flag, that's waving in the wind on the moon. Well, the reality is that there was an arm suspending the flag out and open, and when they were trying to plant the flag to get it to stand erect, like any of that movement would have translated into the material of the flag, right? So that would again, without it actually having to be a hoax, would explain why the flag was waving, right? And the other thing that is probably the most significant is the fact that as humans we've acquired 900 pounds worth of moon rocks that were successfully returned to the Earth. And it's not just the Americans who did it. The Soviet Union did it with an unmanned moon lander. So to me, that speaks volumes to the fact that the hoaxers are just people who are like, they're just caught up in a cultural meme. Right, and it's persisted since the 70s. But because in the 70s they had one NASA employee who speculated in a book that they couldn't have successfully have done it. Right, so were the moon landings fake? Look, some argue that on July 16th, 1969, government officials, filmmakers sworn to secrecy, including Stanley Kubrick. Do you know who Stanley Kubrick is? A famous filmmaker. Were on the military base in Area 51, Nevada, hoaxed the entire thing, right? So what makes it super questionable is the amount of technical staff, support staff for NASA, which included basically 400,000 people, were in on the secret. And they were sworn to secrecy, all to win a propaganda war.
Yeah, I heard of this one lady. She worked for NASA, and she had to hand write out script for the computers. It's like it showed her in a stack of like tons and tons of papers. It's like
I'm like,
imagine doing that and going, yeah, we're faking it, but good job.
Yeah, right. So that again, to me, it just seems like it's just this meme, this cultural meme that's based on distrust of culture, of government institutions that think that they're constantly lying to us. Yes, they are lying to us, but in this case, did they lie? I think that there's enough evidence to suggest that it actually did happen. You're about to say.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say the meme. It's like, oh yeah, if they got to the moon, how do they get through the firmament? It's like the flat earthers believe there's a
right, yeah. I think it's people who are desperate and grasping at things to somehow try to make sense of their world, and instead of deferring to like there are a significant number of individuals who invested the majority of their professional lives in trying to understand this stuff better, and yet somehow you're willing to dismiss it out of hand. I'm not saying that you shouldn't entertain ideas, no matter how controversial, but at some point you have to apply some kind of like reasonable metric, and when you do that, then the hoaxers fail, the flat earthers basically fail, and again, I think it's because people are so desperate for explanations, right?
I think they want like some fantasy. It's not just like fulfilling that kind of uncertainty, because if they could just find out why it is the way it is instead of coming up with conspiracies. Because there's a lot of accounts online where you'll find people making I'm doing air quotes right now, conspiracy theories, but like they're literally jokes. It's like, oh, the FBI is watching me through my camera.
Right. Well, again, it doesn't mean that they're not collecting data on us, but are they?
Oh yeah, no, that was true though.
Okay, but are they directly spying on you?
No.
As an average person, I don't think we're interesting enough for them to give a shit about.
They tapped in the cable networks a long time ago.
Oh, they've been doing that since we've been crossing wires across the Atlantic.
Yeah,
they've been trying to tap in.
It's not very specific data collection on a person or a group.
Right. So again, super unusual, right? And makes you wonder. And then to me now all those 400,000 people that were technical support for it. They've maintained that secrecy from an event that happened in 1969 to protect what the propaganda for the Americans landing somebody on the moon.
No,
I go. It's all of it's kind of, again, it's all kind of ridiculous, and it just it speaks to how prone we are to like to flights of fancy that seem reasonable.
They
right?
have to protect the reptilians, man.
Yeah, of course, of course, right. Our alien overlords, they're the ones who are behind it all.
Yeah, they're cool guys.
They're cool, man. They're so cool.
Sorry,
That's okay. Go ahead.
This is very silly, but have you seen the video of the one lady on the plane going, I'm telling you, he's not real. He's not real.
No, I never saw that. But
this one lady's freaking out. She says she saw a guy blink
out of existence and then back into existence.
No, his eyes blinked.
Oh,
like some reptilian crap.
You know what?
He was like talking through his mind, like weird story.
Lots of deluded people who want to be center of attention, and will say virtually anything to that end, right?
Yeah, I think she was not to use the term Karen, but I think she was upset about something, and she just spazzed out. She was like, "I'm going to make something so fantastical it justifies me."
But again, only anecdotal, and if you're the only one who claims that you saw it, even if you had 5 or 6 people say the same thing, I'd be like, come on, man. It's already difficult enough as it is for us to get a clear picture as to what's going on, and you certainly don't help when you muddy the water, right? And so people like that who are just, again, subjective, self-interested, and want validation or acknowledgement, so they'll do anything to that end. And I'm like going, come on, like it's this kind of base selfishness that in part we struggle with, and then when we're like confronted with information, and again, think about all the moon anomalies. It speaks to like that there's something else going on at the moon, but we can't say definitively what it may or may not be. It's just highly unusual, and there's more than one. There's so many different things that you go like, it should bring it into question, right? But and then you, like I say, this endearing, like, modern day myth or meme that somehow we hoaxed the moon landings. But here, I'll give you a wild speculation. So when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, it's a response to how basically the astronauts themselves, their reactions after they first returned. You'd think that they'd be like jumping for joy, and I've seen footage where they were just kind of distant and almost detached from what was going on, and their comments were kind of like vague, and they just reiterated each other's statements, but without actually, like, investing themselves. Like, you'd think you'd be screaming your head off, I went to the moon, I walked all over the goddamn moon, oh man.
I could
None of that.
Yeah, I could see them really just trying to get used to coming back to Earth's
Oh,
atmosphere.
okay. So you're saying that, like, then maybe
Like,
they were overwhelmed by the experience, but
or no, like physically taxed from the
maybe, perhaps. But I'll offer up this. So, in keeping with the idea that perhaps the moon's hollow, or is a staging ground or a base or a starship for the alien overlords, the reptilians or whatever. What if all that stuff is just, again, more memes and myth, and the reality is the thing that they discovered there was proof of us? Right? Do you understand what I mean by that? So their experiences there demonstrated to them they weren't the first men on the moon, and then a whole host of questions come up. It's a wild speculation on my part. It's not founded in nothing other than the fact that there's all these unusual features about the moon. But what if we're the ones who put it there? What if we're the ones that made it, and it was from a forgotten time, or a time where for whatever reasons it was either abandoned, or we were devastated and destroyed. It could be a whole host of things, but then it speaks to the age of how old humans are, that we could be far older than we imagine, right? And again, it's a wild speculation on my part, and it's not founded in anything, right? I'm just simply, if we're gonna play this game,
Yeah.
then here's my sci-fi version of to explain away all the anomalies of the moon.
Yeah, if they felt distress coming back and it happened to be because they saw something unusual, that would be like groundbreaking news. Of course, it'd be covered up, but like you would have to experience it yourself to actually go, holy
Right.
shit, this is real.
Right.
Like,
So
it would be.
So can you imagine, like, after you have that realization, how long it would take for it to sink in to the point where suddenly, because everything that you believe to be true, everything that was faith-based, it dispels it all. It brings it all into question. And so could that destabilize even the most centered and formidable individual?
I know a lot of people. Not a lot of people. I know of people that they'll see like shapes on the moon and they'll be like, "Oh, that's a pyramid."
There's
It's like that's something that could happen just over time. It's not necessarily something that has to happen.
All right, super interesting that you bring that up. So, what I'd like to do, I'm going to dovetail that into something that interesting that's only a couple of years old. So, China had a soft landing on the far side of the moon on January 3rd, 2019, and it was U2U. So some interesting things came up as a result of that. So the testing that they ran could prove that volcanic activity on the moon didn't end a billion years ago, but may still be active today. The rover also discovered a network of hidden passages under the surface of the dark side of the moon. And this is August 21st, 2023. Right? So again, to what extent and what the nature of them were, right? Couldn't say specifically. The U2U is also currently operationally one of the longest lived lunar rovers, and the first lunar rover to traverse the far side of the moon. So, and it has traveled more than 1,000 meters, 3,300 feet in the time that it's been there. China discovered also glass beads on the moon that contain billions of tons of water. Right? So there's spherules. Within the spherules, there were water. So again, don't even know how to begin to explain it. Scientists detected water trapped inside glass spherules on the moon after analyzing soil samples brought back by China's Chang 5 mission, and this is March 28th and 2023. Right, on December 6, 2021, U2 takes a photo of a cube-shaped object in the distance at the Von Karman crater. China's National Space Administration labeled the photo Mystery Hut. And then not long after, they discovered an explanation for the Mystery Hut. The lunar rover made a closer approach, and apparently the log revealed it was actually just a rock on the crater rim. But I've seen the photos.
Like a cube.
Yeah.
Almost perfect.
Yeah, that you go like, that's not, like, it's so unusual. Now, again, could be a rock, but it's so highly unusual and it stands out against the horizon line that you go like, that really is cube shaped, right? So again, it contributes again to all these anomalies associated with the moon. And look, I could appreciate why after 1969, once they made the moon landing, that they just decided it's in terms of cost, it's not worth continually going back and forth from the moon, right? That there was no real advantage. They've already proven their point. So for financial reasons, it's not unreasonable that's why they stopped going to the moon. Now, however, it's not, again, in terms of speculation, it could be as a result of something unusual that was discovered on the moon.
Oh,
right? So, and then speaking to the unusual things discovered on the moon, the Mystery Hut, right? So you're about to say?
Yeah, to be clear, they're sending rovers there, they're not sending people. That's different. If you send a rover, it's a... If there is hypothetically some weird alien over there, you send a rover, not a person.
Again, it's all unusual, and until we have like I don't want to say a more permanent presence on the moon, but like actually have people returning to the moon again, which is now not unreasonable. Look at Elon Musk and what's his name? Joseph Brandt? Is that the guy's name? No, not Joseph. From Virgin. Jeez, I forgot his name, but it doesn't matter. All those civilian space programs that are competing with each other, it's not unreasonable for humans to return to the moon, right? And in the very foreseeable future, in really the very, very short term. It doesn't have to be a decade. They could probably manage it in a couple of years, and just to have a return trip, so you can put boots on the ground so people can wander around and go, here, this is what we see. And because they could be like man operated drones, that they could check out things that were essentially really difficult to be able to travel to on foot, that they could fly them, over to check out these things. Whether or not they actually will that's entirely something else altogether different, right? You had brought up earlier India's unmanned rover that landed on the moon. So again, we see it. You see that like there's a renewed interest in the moon, and we do have nations making an attempt to check out the moon. Now, my personal feeling is that it's for the potential for revenue in terms of mining and stuff like that, right? So that's why they might actually be doing it. You got something to say?
They said it was for the search of water, specifically ice that was captured in the areas of the craters that are always dark.
Well, it very well could be, but
there's other.
But if that means that there's water there, then potentially could they unlock the water, because there might be a means less that you'd have to carry with you there, because you could use what's there. Just find a conversion process or a process to release it so that it's usable.
One thing I was considering is they haven't found solid forms of water like ice or liquid's not solid, but you know what I mean. like substantial stuff they can grab, keep instead of just like
Except for
vapors.
those sphere hills.
Oh yeah, that's interesting too. I want to figure out more about that. That's
Well, again, I think that I think it's probably just as much a mystery to them as it is to us.
the density is what really freaks me out. Like
Well,
10%. No, you said 2%.
no, it's not. The billions of tons of water that scientists detected the water trapped inside glass spherules.
Oh no, I mean the density, or
Oh,
not the density, the mass of the moon.
which is 1% of the Earth's mass.
That seems pretty incredible if it's a quarter of the actual
Size,
size.
right? So then you go like, so then that speaks to it possibly being hollow.
It would have to have the density of like a wafer.
Well, what we think of it as a thin shell, but what if the shell was like 100 miles deep? Right?
Yeah, and it has like a sponge kind of consistency.
Well, I don't know. Again,
Like-
we're grasping at straws, but it's all that stuff is super suggestive. And like those two Soviet scientists from the 70s, who were like, as crazy as it may sound, it may very well be a hollow spaceship, or it could be a feature of moons that we're completely oblivious to, and it's a natural product of of cosmology, that it occurs as it might even be rare, but it's still an occurrence within the universe. Or again, like you said, it depends whichever way you want to lean. All I do is I just look at what can you verify, and so the stuff that they could confirm to a greater or lesser extent, it just speaks to the mystery of all of it, right?
That's what I love about seeing like science updates on YouTube. Most of the time, it dispels a lot of fantastical stuff, but it still leaves like, hey, this is what reality is. Like hypothetically, if most moons were like that, very low density, it's like, oh wow, that's fascinating. Now there's more questions.
Right.
Like it's
it's
still a journey.
right. So again, much like everything else, you're seeking possible explanations and then trying to get confirmation of which ones seem most likely versus the ones that seem less likely, right?
Which isn't like strict confirmation.
No, but again, it's how we grow in our understanding, right? So again, it makes the moon all the more interesting and fascinating. I love like the entire transient lunar phenomena, like, but we only know that it occurs, and we don't have an adequate explanation of what that is either. So again, that when you look at all of these details, it just speaks to how little we understand or know about the moon, which is the largest object in the nighttime sky, right? And we've even landed on it, and we still don't quite understand what it is, right? So it was interesting that we brought up the Prangyan rover. How do they pronounce it?
I have it in my notes.
Yeah, it didn't matter. The Chandra, is that what it's called?
Chandrayaan.
Yeah, rover. They found evidence of sulfur and even possibly moonquakes, and we know that China confirmed that there could be seismic activity on the moon. So
and the sulfur would actually be contributing to that.
okay, and so and they had a laser-induced spectroscope instrument which detected the aluminum you were talking about earlier, and iron, calcium, chromium, titanium, magnesium, oxygen, and silicon on the surface. And this is as of September 4th, 2023. So again, it's no less fascinating, and you can run the gambit of explanations. And to me, I don't favor one over the other. I do what I always do. I'm going the details that you do have. What conclusions can you derive from them, if any, or does it just deepens the mystery of what it is? So to me, it just deepens the mystery of what the moon may or may not be. So you want to believe in David Icke and I can't remember that other guy. It doesn't matter. Where they talk about it, there being a soul catcher on the moon. That's just
What?
yeah, man.
Wait, so not only is it a spaceship, it also catches souls. And by the way, souls are real.
Because and that's why we reincarnate, and the reason why that it exists there is it's basically so that the population of the Earth, we're a prison planet, and that they harvest our emotions for nutrient consumption for these alien organisms. And again, I go like, it's so far afield, it's so crazy that, but just the same, I go, it's kind of cool, but like in a sci-fi way. But again, you can't, it's just hearsay.
Yeah.
They can't validate, they're not offering up, although that the Mystery Hut photo from China, like, you know, because they said it was a cube.
A cube is a weird shape. Like on Earth, it's easy enough to find like those pyramids, like the kind of like the Giza pyramid, like that type, just from erosion after years and years of
Yeah, but
mountains being
it's
torn
a
down.
pyramid. It's not a cube.
I know
Right?
a cube is so unusual because that's four, like assuming it's stuck
It's
in the
eight.
ground.
It's right. It's 8 sides.
Right, but if it's stuck in the ground, you only see the 4 vertexes, which are 90 degrees, all
Right.
you know, perfect with each other. That's fucking unusual.
Well, and again, like you said, like depending on which way you want to lean, and I don't favor explanations. I'm going here. What can we confirm, and what little we can confirm is mysterious and maybe even suggestive.
Do you know how many times I like to just like see if I could trick myself? I watch those flat Earth. I'm not even joking. I watch flat Earth videos after getting like
Just to see whether or not you can get sucked in.
yeah, like it's a party night for me. I'll choose to like smoke a little more than I should, and then I just sit there completely like almost inebriated, like, whoa, man.
Yeah, I'm so glad I don't participate. I'm meditation's the way to go. Honestly, like I don't entertain flat earthers. I'm not interested in the arguments that they make. I find it again super self-serving and fallacious. That and I'm kind of put off by how passionate they are about something that they base on very superficial evidence, and they ignore like the entire bodies of like a study that definitively demonstrates that the Earth is like a sphere-like shape.
Yeah, like not every person would have to be on it, but there would be, the conspiracy would be so big, it's kind of fucking ridiculous.
Yeah,
like every airline pilot is fucking lying to you.
Yeah. So again, these are people who think that they're standing still.
But if you think you're not gullible, I guarantee you, you need to smoke too much weed, and then like, some of these guys are convincing. I'm like, wait a minute.
No, not to me, not at all. It just means that they're passionate, and what they're offering up as evidence. I go here. You can present your argument, but then there should be room then for people who can present evidence to refute that argument. And everything that they've ever cited in terms of that they present as evidence for why the Earth would be flat, all of it is demonstrated to be erroneous, right? And it's a misinterpretation of stuff, and it's because again, it's people who are desperate to for an explanation that services them, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm going. You shouldn't have a dog in the fight. Part of the failure, right, is that as soon as you start leaning that way, the fact of the matter is now the burden of proof is on you, and you need to have like a bulletproof evidence and argument instead of like stuff that basically comes off as, well, I'm sorry to say this, but wishful thinking. You can hate on me all you want, but I don't care.
Here, let me
right?
interject.
I only interested in the evidence. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it seems like most of the time it's fantastical language that really sells it, because it sounds like quasi-scientific. But if you have like a good verbal affinity, you can kind of hear the bullshit, and you're like, wait a minute, that seems like it doesn't correlate. Like that detail and that detail,
Well,
like you say, are erroneous. Like it's just fantastical.
so when I hear you talk about their choice of language stuff, it sounds like somebody's desperately trying to explain something to to their to validate what they're saying. So it essentially becomes a form of confirmation bias. And I'm going, look, you know, I said it earlier. You know, we're trying to have a better understanding, but understanding's like water in a stream. If you disturb the bottom, it makes it so cloudy that you can't see anymore, right? And so when people make emphatic and definitive statements based on hearsay, I'm like, you're just muddying the water, right? And it's already a difficult enough time for us to determine things that are definitive versus things that people want in service of themselves or just out fallacious, right? So.
That gets pretty scary when you think about like AI technology and how good we can alter photos. Like before you had Photoshop, but now it's like you could pump out systematic fake news.
Okay, again, so that speaks to the idea then that requires us to be the utmost in discerning. And the only way to achieve that is as a result of being a critical, objective observer and critical thinking. So these things are paramount. And I don't hear anybody talking about it or emphasizing the fact that as individuals, we need to start cultivating the capacity to do that. And it's so that we can come to like some kind of reasonable conclusions based on whatever evidence there is, right? And again, it'll in an environment where people favor their subjectivity, their self-interest, their ego, their opinion, their preferences. It's what allows for people to think that like the Earth is flat or the moon landings were hoaxed or like it's just and it really is exhausting. And so for any of you who take personal offense to it, please don't. Like, and if you do, I don't care. Remember, I don't care. But don't you dare ever approach me on the street. All right? All right.
What do you mean? Like they can't walk up and be like, "Hey, man,
yeah, I don't want. I don't want to even entertain them in conversation. That's what I mean. I mean that to me, it's unworthy of it. You find other people think like you, and you share among yourselves. Do not approach me. I'm not interested. And any who would comment on this, I got nothing to say to you beyond what I've already said.
Well, it's actually kind of interesting because you do speculate. You don't put weight on it, but like you still have.
Well, because I give myself the freedom to think.
Yeah, well, you already knew where I was going with that. Like the fantastical truth of you're alive, you're here, we're all here. That includes the viewer.
Sure, 100%.
It's just that reality.
Right. So instead of deciding what it all is, I'm open to it being whatever it actually is. And until you have evidence that's kind of super suggestive or definitive or has a lot of weight in terms of like well measured and there's metrics to verify it, then it's just an idea. And remember, the whole point of what we do here, explore ideas.
Yeah, and the great part is that most evident, I want to say phenomenon, but like just the most evident things that we experience every day, you can appreciate. It's just you have to understand. Everything about existence is kind of phenomenological.
Yeah, it's all an astounding phenomenon. The fact that you're here, but again, we overlook that, right? And then
we make this Harry Potter bullshit about the fucking Klingons attacking this person. It's like I love stories. Don't get me wrong.
I love science fiction. I love Star Trek. I actually really enjoy the Harry Potter movies. All of it. But just because I have the ability to appreciate the fiction of it, I don't immediately equate somehow that within that fiction there's an air of reality. I think reality is even crazier than we imagine. But until you have definitive proof of it, it's just wild speculation, which is, again, there's nothing wrong with, but I don't treat the speculations with value. right? I go, it's just, you're just exercising your ability to try to make sense of things, right? But I don't, until there's ironclad evidence, I don't make any assumptions. I just try and have fun with it. And I go, maybe that's the point. Maybe the point of all of this is to have fun with the fact that you're here, right? Stop being so goddamn grim, right? Can I get a time shot?
Yep, we're 1 hour, 40 minutes in.
You know what? I'm really satisfied with the conversation. How about you?
I'm good.
Okay, so I think I'm ready to close. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
Have a phenomenological day.
Having said that, question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance, seek knowledge, seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical objective thinker. Thank you for your time. Have a great evening.